Evening, heathens and heretics. Welcome to another In the Abyss review. September's been a bit of a monster so far, and as we're still not done, this Friday the new Code Orange, the Above, drops. So, as the Voice of Reason's made the odd sweeping statement about this band in the past, not necessarily on here, I don't think, but there's been the odd comment. We thought it was probably best to give this one a bit of a once-over. I think it's worth having a look at. So, look. I mean, Code Orange is a band. First couple of albums, I suppose they were probably more of a hardcore band than they were anything else, weren't they? I think it's fair to say. Before they kind of evolved into this industrial tinged, I won't say the N word yet. I know that bring that up a little bit. But you know, they were sort of brutally heavy, weren't they? And there was, like I said, it was hardcore, but now you've got those sort of touches of Ministry and White Zombie, and there's goth and there's industrial and there's all sorts gone in. So the last album, Underneath, or the last proper album, Underneath, was a real sort of mismatch of stuff. So let's start with that, because you're a big fan of that album, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, as you said, those first couple of albums, effectively hardcore albums, but the second one, Forever, was this real slice of dense, borderline industrial, kind of very harsh sounding, you say dark, cathartic album, but it was fundamentally still hardcore. And with Underneath, they pushed all sorts of boundaries, all sorts of things going on, really dynamic, really cathartic, but really pushing and pulling and twisting and turning all of those sort of 90s influences we mentioned. And I said, I think that was my favorite album of 2020, which, considering I was a bit distracted and didn't actually listen to a great deal of new music, maybe that's an unfair sort of judgment to make, but it's still a tremendous album. And I also say it's probably the best nu metal album in 20 years.
There's that sweeping statement I was talking about.
I know. I think the sound of it, how it approached dynamics, how it approached rhythms and groove and catharsis, for me, it's a nu metal album. But time and time again, I've seen plenty of good justification on why nu metal could have been, regarded as one of the great musical subgenres if it wasn't for a lot of the nonsense that came with it. But I won't go there. I think absolutely fine. It was a great rock album. It was a bloody great nu metal album, and it was one of the best albums of the year. And of course, I was very hopeful for this as a result. I'm memorable of that particular album because that album dropped the Friday before we all went into lockdown.
Fuck.
I remember that because that was a Friday, and that was a Friday we had to do certain things, anticipating at work that the shit was about to hit the fan, and I made a bit of a pig's ear of aspects of it, so it wasn't a good day for me. And that album helped on that particular weekend.
There's your catharsis, mate.
So good memories in that regard. But I am looking forward to this album, or I have been anyway.
All right, so it's called The Above then. So there's the first couple of songs they dropped. You've got a guest vocalist in there as well on track 3, Take Shape, which we'll talk about no doubt in a minute. I think I'm not as big a Code Orange fan as you. I really enjoyed Underneath, but I've never been sort of blown away by them. So I was sort of interested to see where they were going to go with this. And my first impressions, it's very, and there's going to be some buzzwords and buzz terms throughout the next half an hour, but alternative and nu metal, those two things are definitely in there. But what are your first impressions on it?
My first impressions is that there's a lot of juxtaposition between tracks that are, I think, fundamentally 90s rock, alternative 90s rock. There's that real chorus heavy, groovy, sort of moody melody kind of feel, but catchy. And it's offset by, I suppose, the kind of stuff that they did very well on the previous album. And it sits a little bit off kilter as a result, because I'm thinking, what does this album want to be? And that's still my thoughts after a few listens. It's a bit of an uncertain album overall in what it what they're trying to do and what direction they want to go.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, like I said at the top, alternative is definitely that 90s sort of. If you think of bands like Filter, to the other end of the spectrum. If we're gonna talk about Ministry and White Zombie and all that kind of thing in the 90s, Filter were that more sort of polished take on, in inverted commas, industrial. But I do get a bit of that. It feels like this is their attempt to push to the next level commercially, a bit more into the mainstream. Don't get me wrong, there's some fucking hooks on this album that you can imagine on, American radio rock, and it's that kind of thing. That track 2 was the first one that grabbed me. Theatre of Cruelty starts off with like that massive crushing industrial riff, but then it just goes, like you said, that awkward juxtaposition. That's when it kind of first sort of kicks in for me, and that theme is right the way through the album, but it's just still got that dense heaviness that they're known for.
Yeah, I mean, the first couple of tracks are interesting because you've got that quiet build-up going on that never happens on the first track, Never Far Apart. Instead, you get this piano-led chorus.
Yeah.
Before it climaxes in, like I say, the guitars and the shouting.
It's an odd way to start an album, that, isn't it?
It's
quite so low-key.
It's bizarre. But then we launch into Theatre of Cruelty. Like I say, again, lots of stop-start, twist turn, shouty quiet, lots of dynamics. But what I get from that first that I suppose that first loud proper track full is that there's not a great deal going on in terms of melody. I'm struggling to latch onto anything, to the point where obviously the third track comes in, which is Take Shape, which guest stars Billy Corgan. And again, and granted, I'm familiar with this track, but it just makes it stand out so much because you've got a big hook on that chorus and you've got a big, mid-paced beat, underpinning the whole thing. But I kind of forget what's happened before.
Does that track remind you of a little bit of Nine Inch Nails when it starts? Stuff like Closer, the more kind of
like
brooded Nine Inch Nails stuff.
It's definitely got that industrial vibe to it. Absolutely, yeah. And it's a big song. It's a big fucking song.
It's a Linkin Park kind of chorus, big anthemic, again polished American radio, new metal for want of another term. But what lets it down for me, and this is going to be a personal thing because I can't fucking stand Smashing Pumpkins, is Corgan. Corgan's voice. It just.
Oh right.
I never realised. You may say different, but I can't. I just can't abide his voice. I never have liked it.
I didn't realise that about you, actually, for some reason. Okay.
There's been the odd moment with Pumpkins over the years, but largely I just can't get past his voice.
But it's interesting because I feel you got this track which is its own thing, but I feel that 90s vibe. Some of the songs we're going to talk about with the choruses, it often feels like you've got it feels like Helmet almost trying to cover the Pumpkins in places. Yeah. It really does strike me like that. But yeah. Okay.
Like I said, that's a very personal, take on that. But look, I quite like the song, and like I said, it's a big chorus. It's really hooky. It just gets let. You know what it makes me think of? Makes me think of Metallica's "Memory Remains." Live when you've got it without Marianne Faithfull. It's a great song, and it's kind of that similar thing. It just got that whiny, warbly noise towards the end of this, and it just lets it down.
Right. Well. Fair enough, but you keep your mouth bars to yourself.
Straight after that, the Mask of Sanity slips. All I'm going to say on that is Korn. Sounds like Korn to me.
Okay, that's interesting.
I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it does. It just sounds like Korn.
See, for me, this is a blend of, I suppose, the much more aggressive Code Orange, but also this more accessible route that they definitely can go down. And before it stops later on and climaxes in this very dark, mid-paced groove, which is underpinned by, I suppose, a horror movie piano line, and it's great. And it's a little melody that's reprised on the final track, The Above, which kind of acts as a summary of what's the entire album. But yeah, so that's all right. Again, we like that, so that's good. Of course, it leads well into the next track, Mirror, which is, for want of a better word, the ballad. But
yeah. I mean,
we're not going to say power ballad.
Yeah, when we were listening to this, I was listening to it with Sarah, my wife, and first thing she piped up and said, "Oh, it feels a little bit new romantic at times." But it's a gothy, little gothy undertone to it.
And it's interesting because it's again it's underpinned by like a trip hop beat. So yeah, again, very 90s for me. But it's a good. It places well after what's coming before. And I like it. So
yeah, it's decent enough. I mean, a couple of other songs just to pick out. A Drone opting out of the Hive. Some of the song titles are bizarre on this album. Again, this is a bit more new metal, awkward, abrasive, but this reminds me of that fucking god awful King 810. But that same kind of thing done a lot better.
Yeah, this is a very dynamic track. But again, this is kind of what's sort of concerning me about this album at this point, especially with what I mentioned about Fierce with Cruelty, is that what they did so well underneath is they managed to combine those brutal dynamics with melody and sound. And it seems like so far, when they've gone for the same approach on this album, there's almost no melody there. And what's disappointing is we get a couple of tracks later on, The Game and Grooming My Replacement, which have both been advanced singles. And honestly, those 4 songs, between them, lots of dynamics, lots of new metal stuff and shouty, thrashy stuff going on, but barely any melody.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, considering what we're going to talk about with the rest of the album, the melodies, I'm just thinking, why are they here? Because they sit. This is what I mean by the juxtaposition. They sit. It breaks up the rest of the album, but you don't want that in certain cases.
Yeah.
When you've got a lot going on and you want to bring things down a bit with a track like Mirror, yeah, that's what you want. But when you've got what are arguably songs, heavy songs, loud and angry and all that are done very well, and you're kind of breaking up with, well, shouting here and there, and I'm wondering, do you want to be doing this? Because it feels much more contrived than I'd like. And compared to the other songs, it almost feels a bit forced.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel, it's like you've almost, that's it, just get the heavy stuff onto the album because that's what we do. That's what we did well last time.
It's almost like they don't want that whole thing that these are our roots. We need to get some of it in there somewhere to keep certain fans happy. Is there a bit of that, do you think?
I think there is an element, well, I don't know, but it's a fair point to make. And it's unnecessary because, again, they can do that stuff with tune, with melody. They prove that. And it's like they've kind of, we've got plenty of that already going on in the album. Let's just go a bit nuts here and there.
Yeah.
But it feels like I say, it's a 14-track album. And I think it's too long an album, honestly.
Yeah, that's these days, that's a rarity as well. And anything north of sort of 10, 11 is a real rarity these days. Exactly.
And, those 4 tracks, I think if you keep a Drone opting out of the Hive, because I think that's got a lot going on, and so I think it justifies its place because it's quite, there's a lot to latch onto there, even if it lacks melody. You get rid of the other 3 tracks, you got an 11-track album, which for the most part is good / really good.
Well, it clocks into 51 minutes.
Yeah,
so that's beyond the prime territory, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just I just feel that you could have. Because, like I said, I think a couple of those ones, like Grooming My Replacement and The Game, they're short.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's a bit of a weird one, but it's fine because it just makes me sort of realise how good the songs are, the chorus-led songs are on the rest of the album.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The best moments on this are the ones with the big radio-friendly, almost radio-friendly choruses and just simple hooks. Power chords. There's nothing overcomplicated.
Yeah.
Going away from the songs themselves, then, what do you think about the production on it? Because at times it sounds massive.
Yeah, I mean, the production on the last two albums were bang on for what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
They've got that. They've done that again here, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but maybe you think, oh, there's a bit too much going on and trying to make certain things clean and whatnot where they don't need to, and you can keep a bit more of a harshness.
Yeah, perhaps. But again, like you said, that's where the whole sort of flow of the album becomes a little bit awkward. I suppose it feels quite current, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where alternative metal's going, and you even look at bands like, albeit heavier end of the spectrum, bands like Lorna Shore. It feels of a similar approach to that. They're a bit more obviously towards death metal, but it's a similar kind of approach. We want to have this modern take on what this kind of music was 20 years ago, and we're going to add in all these extra bits to make it sound more interesting, and feels a bit like that for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the thing is, I think people really don't appreciate the link between, I suppose, grunge / alternative rock in the 90s and new metal.
Yeah.
They were treated as very different things, but we wouldn't have had new metal if it wasn't for grunge, because that angst, that sort of approach to rock music, which was very different, it made it possible to bring those dynamics and that approach in later on. And there was a clear link, which I don't think has ever really been explored that much by certain bands. And it's good to see that Code Orange are doing that, but you gotta get the balance better, I think.
They overthought it, do you think? Maybe trying to do a little bit too much.
Yeah, potentially. It just feels like you say, if they actually just say, let's just write some songs and focus on the choruses, you've got a great album.
Yeah.
And you know what? But because I've seen plenty of accusations of selling out already. Before this album came out, even with the last album, and I think there's going to be a lot of that now anyway. But sod it, do what you want, make the music you want to make.
Yeah, fucking right. Yeah,
completely. But I do think if you're going to try and keep one foot in the recent past, be respectful of that rather than do it for what sometimes sounds like the sake of doing it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Where do you think they're going to go from here then? Because it's going to be one of those albums that it could either completely bomb, or it could send them to another level because of the sort of commercial-ish feel to it at times. Do you think they'll undoubtedly do festivals next year, I would imagine? Don't be surprised if they're download. I think they're even a potential Bloodstock band for me. I think they might fit that profile that Bloodstock go after, the slightly more edgy, modern, sort of halfway up the bill kind of thing. So, they've probably got a platform to grow off of this album, and there's probably a couple of songs in this that would be singles in America and would probably do pretty well.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is the thing, is that they have absolutely proven on this album that they can do what they want to do going forward very well. They can write songs, they can write choruses, they can be heavy, they can be angry, and that's fine. And where this album does that, it does it very well. And I think they will continue to go up and latch onto that. I just feel they should embrace that fully, rather than sort of potentially fear the old fan base. But I think
that's a good shout. So if you're gonna, we don't really do this on these reviews, but if you're going to score this album out of, let's say, score it out of 11, fuck 10, score it out of 11, where'd you put it?
If we're scoring it out of 11, I'd probably say a 7.
That's pretty decent.
Out of 11, though, like I say, with that extra sort of thing, I think. But again, because there's enough great stuff on this album, to justify it itself. It might be one of those moments for them as a band where they transition, and the next album, 2-3 years time, might be an absolute fucking stormer. They might take what they did on Underneath, what they've done on this, and hone that, and they could come out with something pretty massive in 2 or 3 years time. Absolutely, yeah. I don't doubt that.
Yeah, big potential, and they're a big name now. Anyway, they've been around for quite a long time when you think about it. So let's see what happens. But in future, no more Billy Corgan, please, and I'll I'll always take interest. So there you go. That drops this Friday. I'm sure there will be a lot of opinion on it anyway, and I'm quite interested to see what Twitter and other social media platforms make of it, whether it will get slated or whatever. Should be quite interesting. So yeah, they're definitely a polarizing band, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to change at this point.
No, which is that's kind of what we're here for. The worst thing is when they're boring. At least if they're challenging people and it's people have got opinions on it, it just makes it a lot more interesting. So let's see what happens. But right, thank you for that, Voice of Reason. We will be back this weekend on Sunday as normal with another episode. We should have the Middle Eastern Beauty Queen back as well. We think he's connected. I think he's got an aerial attached to the back of a camel somewhere, and he'll get some kind of connection. So, favorite debut albums this week, isn't it? Next one.
Yeah. The debuts.
Yeah. So it might be really predictable. It might not. Best way is to find out. Listen in. So yeah. Until then, we'll leave you there. Thanks for listening. Stay metal.